There is a massive, untapped food source hovering right above your head that defies every rule of modern survival. We have been conditioned to believe a lie about where our sustenance comes from. We are taught that food must be dug from the earth with sweat and steel. We are taught that the harvest requires back-breaking labor, heavy machinery, and a constant battle against the soil. But nature designed a loophole that the industrial food system has spent the last century trying to close. There is a plant that rejects the dirt. It refuses to hide its calories underground. Instead, it rains them down from the canopy like heavy, starchy hailstones. Imagine a crop that requires no digging, no tilling, and no tractors. Imagine a carbohydrate source that grows 3 times faster than the wheat in your bread and produces 4 times the edible biomass of the potatoes on your dinner plate. But this is not just about volume. It is about independence. For 10,000 years, this biological battery-powered civilizations that had no access to fossil fuels, it allowed Polynesian voyagers to cross the Pacific Ocean because it could stay fresh in the hold of a canoe for months without rotting. It allowed West African kingdoms to build complex societies without the need for the plow. It was the ultimate engine of human expansion. But today, if you look for it in the aisles of your supermarket, you will find a vacuum. You will find 40 varieties of boxed cereal and 0 trace of the vine that fed the world. The absence of this food is not an accident. It is a crime scene. The agricultural establishment did not just lose this plant. They hunted it down. They declared it a public enemy. They spent millions of tax dollars to brand it a biological pollutant. They called it a weed. They called it a nuisance. They called it the air potato. But the biology tells a story that the lobbyist groups are terrified you will hear. The archive opens in the humid forests of 1974. When archaeologists and anthropologists began studying the agricultural remnants of pre-industrial societies in the tropics, they expected to find the usual evidence of struggle. They expected to find soil depletion, erosion from plowing, and the skeletal markers of hard labor. What they found instead silenced the room. They found evidence of massive, vertical food systems that integrated seamlessly with the forest. They found a method of farming that did not fight nature, but used it as a scaffold. While the peasants of feudal Europe were destroying their bodies to pull meager turnips from the freezing mud, the farmers of the Yam Belt in West Africa and the cultivators of Edo period Japan were simply reaching up. They were harvesting a crop that utilized the 3-dimensional space of the forest, turning every tree into a trellis and every fence into a pantry. This was not a primitive foraging strategy for desperate times. This was an elevated, sophisticated agricultural technology. In the Philippines, the connection to this plant was so deep that they had specific names for the different shapes of the aerial tubers, classifying them with the precision of a jeweler grading diamonds. In India, it was known as a famine breaker, but that name does it a disservice. It was not just for famine. It was the insurance policy that prevented famine from ever happening in the first place. They knew that relying solely on ground crops, which are vulnerable to floods, rots, and pests, was a strategic error. They knew that true security hangs in the air, separated from the decay of the soil. So what did the ancients understand about this hanging fruit that modern food science is trying to obscure? Let me tell you what is actually inside the rough skin of the tuber they want you to poison. The aerial yam, specifically the cultivated varieties of Dioscorea bulbifera, contains a nutritional profile that makes the modern white potato look like a wet sponge. When you analyze the raw data, the difference is not just marginal, it is categorical. A standard russet potato, the backbone of the Western fast food diet, is roughly 2 grams of protein per serving and is mostly simple starch that converts rapidly to sugar. The aerial yam is a slow-burning energy powerhouse. It contains a superior amino acid profile, providing the building blocks for muscle repair that ancient laborers relied on. But the real shock comes When you look at the micronutrients, it is packed with potassium at levels that dwarf common bananas. It carries significant amounts of vitamin B6 and copper, elements essential for neurological function and blood health. But it gets stranger. The aerial yam contains unique bioactive compounds, most notably diosgenin. This is a steroid saponin that is virtually absent in the grains and tubers of the modern West. Diosgenin is the starting material for the synthesis of sex hormones and corticosteroids. In the mid-20th century, pharmaceutical companies used this exact compound from related yam species to create the first birth control pills and anti-inflammatory drugs. Think about the implications of that. The ancient world was eating the raw materials for hormonal balance and inflammation control directly from the vine. They did not need a prescription. They needed a ladder. The energy density is equally staggering. Because the aerial tubers hang in the breeze, they cure on the vine. They do not have the high water content that makes ground potatoes rot within weeks. An aerial yam can sit on a shelf at room temperature for 4 to 6 months without losing its nutritional potency. It is a shelf-stable survival ration that grows itself. So here is the question that the United States Department of Agriculture refuses to answer honestly. If this plant produces more food per square foot than corn, if it is more nutritious than the potato, and if it stores longer than almost any other fresh vegetable, why are there state-sponsored programs to eradicate it? Why are homeowners in Florida encouraged to bag it up and throw it in the trash? The suppression of the aerial yam is a masterclass in economic protectionism. It was not killed by a lack of flavor. It was killed by the invention of the combine harvester. When the Industrial Revolution swept through agriculture, the primary goal shifted from feeding people to feeding machines. The entire food system was redesigned around crops that could be planted in endless, flat rows and harvested by massive tractors. You cannot run a combine harvester through a three-dimensional forest garden. You cannot mechanize the harvest of a vine that climbs 20 feet into the canopy. The aerial yam was too unruly for the assembly line. It was too independent for the bank loan. The chemical fertilizer industry, a $200 billion empire built on the Haber-Bosch process, looked at this plant and saw a nightmare. This vine does not require their synthetic nitrogen. It draws nutrients from the deep soil with its massive underground root system and pumps them up to the aerial tubers. It creates its own mulch as it drops leaves. It is a closed-loop system that requires zero inputs from the petrochemical industry. They classified it as a noxious weed because they could not figure out how to send you a bill for growing it. But the war against this plant went beyond simple neglect. In the southern United States, specifically Florida, the state declared biological warfare on Dioscorea bulbifera. They released the air potato leaf beetle, an insect imported specifically to skeletonize the leaves of this vine. They spent taxpayer money to breed a bug to destroy a food source. They launched public awareness campaigns telling people that the air potato was a green menace choking out the native flora. They showed pictures of vines covering trees, sparking fear in suburban homeowners. They never mentioned that there are edible cultivars. They never mentioned that this weed was a staple food for millions of people across the ocean. They flattened the narrative. They lumped the toxic wild varieties in with the edible ancient varieties and condemned the entire species to the compost bin. The logic of the suppression is terrifyingly simple. You cannot patent a potato that clones itself in the leaf axils of every single plant. You cannot force a farmer to buy seed stock every spring when the harvest itself is the seed. You cannot sell heavy tillage equipment to a man who only needs a basket. You cannot sell herbicides to a woman who grows her carbohydrates vertically, safely above the weeds. You cannot control a food supply that doubles its biomass every 48 hours without a single drop of diesel fuel. You cannot threaten a population with inflation and supply chain collapse when their dinner grows like kudzu on the telephone pole. The aerial yam represents the ultimate threat to the scarcity model. It is food sovereignty in its purest, most uncontrollable form. They did not suppress it because it was dangerous to you. They suppressed it because it was dangerous to their bottom line. But here is what they could not erase. The biology itself, the knowledge itself, while American extension agents were handing out brochures on how to kill it. Half the world never stopped eating it. In the rural villages of Nigeria, the yam barn is still the center of the household. A structure built specifically to display the wealth of the harvest. They call it by names that command respect. In the volcanic soils of Hawaii, the Kanaka Maoli still cultivate the hoi, preserving the genetics that crossed the ocean in the original voyaging canoes. In the backyards of the Caribbean, grandmothers still tend to the trellis, ignoring the imported white bread in the stores. This was never famine food. This was the food of chiefs. This was the food of rituals. But the knowledge was fractured. The Western world was given amnesia. We were taught to look at a vine producing free food and see a pest infestation. We were taught to spray it with Roundup. We were taught to fear the very abundance that could liberate us from the grocery store. We were taught to worship the monoculture and despise the jungle. That era of blindness is ending today. The cost of food is rising. The soil is turning to dust. The fertilizer supply chain is breaking. The aerial yam is waiting for the moment we realize that the solution to our hunger was never in the ground. It was hanging above us the whole time. So, here is what you do. You stop looking down at the dirt. You start looking up, but you must proceed with the intelligence of an ancestor, not the carelessness of a consumer. You need to find the specific edible cultivars of Dioscorea bulbifera. This is the most critical step in the entire process. You must distinguish between the wild, bitter air potato, which contains toxic alkaloids and has a smooth, round skin, and the cultivated, edible aerial yam, which has an angular, blocky, often warty appearance. The toxic one looks like a perfect sphere. The edible one looks like a rough stone. Nature marks the difference, and you must learn to read it. You find a source from a reputable heirloom grower, a permaculture guild, or an ethnobotanical garden. You do not dig up random vines in the Florida wild unless you know exactly what you are doing. You get the right genetics. You plant a single bulb at the base of a sunny wall, a dead tree, or a chain-link fence. You walk away. You let it climb. You let it drink the sunlight. You let it build its solar panels. When the vine dies back in the winter and the leaves turn yellow, you do not dig. You do not plow. You simply walk out to your garden, reach out your hand, and take the heavy, dense tubers that hang there like ornaments. You cook it with the respect it deserves. You steam it. You roast it. You boil it until it is soft and yielding. You taste the nutty, rich flavor that is somewhere between a potato and a chestnut. You feed it to your family, not as a novelty, but as a staple. You reclaim the name that the chemical companies tried to erase. You stop calling it a weed. You call it by its true name, food. You call it Up-Yam. You call it hoi. You call it life. Every person who plants an aerial yam in their backyard is one more proof that we do not need their heavy machinery to feed ourselves. Every trellis, covered in heart-shaped leaves, is a shield against their manufactured scarcity. Every dinner made from these hanging tubers is an act of rebellion against a system that wants you weak, dependent, and hungry. The vine they poisoned, the vine they burned, the vine they taught you was a monster to be destroyed. Ancient people knew it was a gift from the gods. The corporations that tried to kill it definitely knew it was a threat to their monopoly. Now you know it is the key to your freedom. The aerial yam is still here, still climbing towards the sun in the forgotten corners of the world, still producing massive calories for zero labor, still waiting for anyone willing to lift their eyes from the dirt and accept the gift. It can feed you. It can free you. If this opened something for you, subscribe. Every share helps preserve knowledge they spent a century trying to erase. The next vault opens soon,